This is a tough time for a lot of people, millions of folks all across the eastern seaboard, but America's tougher. And we're tougher because we pull together, we leave nobody behind, we make sure that we respond as a nation and remind ourselves that whenever an American is in need, all of us stand together to make sure that we're providing the help that's necessary.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, October 31st. Welcome to Morning Joe. With us on set, we have MSNBC and Time Magazine senior political analyst Mark Halperin and national affairs editor for New York Magazine and MSNBC political analyst John Heilman. Willie's coming in the room right now. Let's get right to the news.
Really sort of sauntering in.
He is.
What is that?
Wow.
Monocle.
Got a lot of presidential polls to get to, and we will.
I'll tell you what, important ones that really narrow the focus of this race.
Right. But first, we're going to start with the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. The president of the United States pledging quick relief for the millions of victims of the hurricane. Today, President Obama is scheduled to arrive at Atlantic City to survey the damage alongside Governor Chris Christie. This morning, the Associated Press reports the storm killed at least 50 people. There are more than 8.2 million households still without power across 17 states. And many of the outages could last beyond Election Day. Between damage to property and the economy, the total impact expected to reach a staggering $50 billion. The damage was perhaps nowhere worse than the coastline of New Jersey, where Sandy came ashore, laying waste to an amusement park and historic boardwalk at Seaside Heights. As for the airports, JFK, Newark, they're expected to resume limited service this morning. The same cannot be said for LaGuardia. JetBlue posted these photos of the runway submerged. More than 18,000 flights have already been canceled as a result of Sandy. And police had to take to the air to save storm victims from rooftops in Staten Island, New York, after floodwaters surrounded their homes. They were loaded one by one into baskets before being hoisted to safety. And now let's go to Breezy Point, a neighborhood of Queens, which looks like a war zone after a fire devastated the small community, absolutely devastated it. More than 100 homes were destroyed. Officials say the high winds from the storm pushed the flames from one building to the next. Amazingly, there were no serious injuries reported there. But my God, look at that neighborhood. It is completely gone. Everything is gone.
It is.
The devastation there. It's a neighborhood, as we saw in the news last night, made up mostly of firefighters and police officers who live there, which kind of makes it, in some ways,
I talked to
painful.
one of my friends at the FDNY who was fighting the fire, talked about standing back because they couldn't get to it because of the storm surge, and they were literally watching their own homes. The fire would jump from home to home to home, and there was nothing they could do about it. They couldn't get close enough to fight it. They had to stand and watch their own neighborhood burn to the ground.
It's so sad. It's so sad. It's amazing nobody was injured out there.
Nobody.
I was sure somebody would have been caught in those flames. Amazing.
Well, you know, a lot of these neighborhoods were evacuated, obviously, and there were those who didn't. And there were a lot of problems caused by that as well. And then a lot of freak deaths. I mean, people just sometimes people doing the right thing and getting caught in the path of the wrong thing. Horrible. A lot to talk about there. We'll be covering the aftermath and the information as it comes in. We also are just days away from a presidential election, and there will be some impact there, literally to the logistics of it. We've got 6 days to go until Election Day. The focus is still on the critical swing states. Polling from CBS News, the New York Times, and Quinnipiac shows the president up by 5 points in Ohio. That is unchanged from 2 weeks ago. In Florida, just a single point separates the two candidates. The president had a 9-point lead in September. It's a similar story in Virginia, where Mitt Romney has closed the president's lead to within 2 points. Are you really going to slurp your coffee? Yes, you are. Okay. When it comes to early,
brutal.
Well, Mike Heilman,
he wasn't slurping his coffee.
All right, early voting. Well, I just wondered.
It's like
I just wondered. You're like my dad. My dad does that. It drives me crazy.
When it comes to early voting, the president's ahead in both Ohio and Virginia. I'll tell you what, though, the economic outlook's a big reason why Barack Obama is maintaining this 5-point lead. Look at this same CBS New York Times Quinnipiac poll. These internals are brutal for Mitt Romney. any way you slice it, unless you believe that Quinnipiac, one of the most accurate polling outfits out there, is cooking the books. And if you do, change channels because you're listening to the wrong channel.
Yes.
Okay, so the internals of this poll show that 52% of the people in Ohio think the economy is getting better. 47% think the economy is staying the same or getting worse. And when asked who cares more about people like them, President Obama leads Mitt Romney by almost 18 points. John Heilman, if it's Ohio, and the president's maintaining a 5-point lead, and he's ahead 2-1 in early voting in Ohio based on this poll, if you assume that the people at Quinnipiac are not in the tank for Barack Obama and are not sniffing glue, and none of us at this table believe that because, again, 4 years ago and 2 years ago, Quinnipiac was really one of the most accurate polls.
Yeah.
This is a firewall that is going to be hard for Mitt Romney to get past.
Sure, starting to look like that, and it has been looking like that for a while. I mean, we've seen a lot of polling, and there's been some variance on this, but I don't think there's been a poll that's had Romney closer than 2 in Ohio.
Well, there was the one Ohio newspaper poll that had him tied this weekend.
I forgot about that momentarily.
Yeah.
But mostly what we've seen over the last months, and most acutely over the last couple of weeks, is a lot of polling that has Obama 3 to 5 points ahead, and internals that look a lot like this. And, we've discussed it ad nauseum on the air why that is and what the effect of the auto bailout is and the fact that the unemployment rate there is way below the national average and people have a sense of economic optimism in the state that is greater than
but we're less than a week out. We're less than a week out. He's maintaining a 5-point lead, not only in this poll. He had a 5-point lead in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, also historically one of the more accurate polls. At some point, Romney's people telling you and me and everybody else, don't believe the media polls. They've got all of the figures wrong. Our internals show we're tied.
Well,
at some point, that just doesn't wash. They got to win Michigan or Pennsylvania or Minnesota.
I think that's right. And look, you look at the way they're behaving in Ohio, too, with the ad that they put on, this whole thing about Chrysler and Jeep. And, they're behaving with, there's an element of apparent desperation on their part. They seem to be throwing a lot of stuff at the wall in Ohio, which suggests a certain amount of, if not desperation, they have a sense that they're losing there.
Mark, you look at the Quinnipiac poll this morning, and you see it's still a 5-point lead. We've got less than a week till the election. You look at the internals. Over 50% of the people there think that in Ohio the economy's getting better. And I'm underlining this because I'm not saying Mitt Romney can't win, but if you take Ohio off the table for Mitt Romney, and it's really close. It's really, really close to being off the table for Mitt Romney. Unless there is some massive Reagan-like landslide the last week, then suddenly Mitt Romney's pathway to 270 gets very, very narrow. He's got to run the board or he's got to expand the map.
Well, and don't forget Virginia, which also, according to most of the recent polling dating, is not at all a sure thing for the president. For Mitt Romney, and Florida, where Governor Romney's spending the day. The last 48 hours has seen a lot of the meta-narrative move towards Romney is in a commanding position, particularly because we've seen advertising go on in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Minnesota and candidate visits and surrogate visits. Yeah. If Governor Romney can't find a way to win Ohio, it's got a very hard path, and he still has to lock down these southern states. So I think you're right. The Romney people say they're in a much better position in Ohio than these public polls show. If they're wrong about that, he's not going to win.
Every public media poll, Willie, has to be cooking their books for Barack Obama.
Or assuming the electorate wrong.
Assuming the electorate wrong. And if the electorate has changed so radically in 2 years that suddenly Quinnipiac is confused, fine, somebody will give a dissertation on it after the election. I just don't see it. And I'm frustrated this morning because they keep telling me, don't believe the media polls. Don't believe the media polls. Here we are a week out, less than a week out. It's still 5 points in Ohio. I can tell you as a practicing politician, if you're down 5 points a week out and you were down 5 points 2 weeks out, There are problems.
And Obama at 50, not at 47.
And Obama's at 50 in Ohio, Willie.
And one other note inside that New York Times poll, conventional wisdom is that President Obama would struggle with white working class voters. In Ohio anyway, not in Virginia, not in Florida, but in Ohio, he's even with Mitt Romney among white voters who do not have a college degree. That's very important.
And by the way, I think he's up, 30 in Florida?
30, yeah.
And so he's up 30 points, Willie, in Florida among white voters, but in Ohio he's dead even.
He's dead even. Florida and Virginia.
And Virginia.
He's 30 points, yeah.
And think about how much of the negative Bain advertising took place this summer. And you still see it in the numbers there on the doesn't care about people like me. Romney's numbers are still upside down there. He's got negative, a little over 50% people say that Governor Romney doesn't care about people like them. Only about 44 say they do. That is still the result of a summer of pummeling in Ohio by the Obama campaign and the Democratic super PACs, which worked Ohio harder, knowing that the state could be a firewall, knowing that they could hold the electoral map, that they could hold Ohio. They hit him harder there than anywhere, and you can still see in the internals how that shows up in terms of Romney's image in that state.
Okay.
And so, Mika, I said that they had to run the table.
Right.
If they lose Ohio, or they have to expand the map. One area where Romney's people are talking about expanding the map, Michigan.
Exactly. You mentioned Michigan. Mark Halperin, and a new poll finds Mitt Romney is closing in on President Obama's once comfortable lead in that state. The Detroit News WDIV Local 4 polls found that among likely voters, the race has tightened to be within the margin of error. Earlier this month, Romney was trailing President Obama by approximately 6 percentage points. And with signs that Michigan is once again in play, the pro-Romney super PAC Restore Our Future launched a $2.2 million ad buy there, and the Obama campaign is countering with its first network TV ads in Michigan. The ads are expected to begin airing today and will run through Election Day.
So, Mark Halperin, Michigan. Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well,
Michigan. That's a good poll, right?
It is.
Michigan's in play now?
I mean, if you think that the Quinnipiac poll is right about Ohio, then the Obama explanation of why they're going into these states is more credible.
These states being Michigan,
and Pennsylvania, which is not, oh my God,